Hello, Tulsi Gabbard. All the countries involved with Judge Napolitano subjects and these bad things in the world and the good things. They have rules with countries A through Z how used remotely by a hyperforeign, for example, so to speak. For example, the breaching method is replaced right from the founders' communications to us that have been declassified. They have measured and maintained where everyone's relying on others to think about them, about the principles with each age and what we are actually capable of discerning at each age of fact shaping nature. They have little rackets with a whole bunch of natures of organized crimes, self-confessed roles, with which that's what this is about. This is what this is about. Black people's rights of eyes means to discern that the sciences have been dishonest about what nature communicates to us, about what colonization was about what came before it, what that was about. In other words, and what came before the religious messengers were even born, demonstrably since then, too. Only sciences that have been criminally foreign influence from off their locations, but self-guided roles. Oh, it's not my thing to change how we don't address black people's rights of life. It's not my fault. There are types of experts. So an English expert can't jump in. And show, too, they have criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, or principle treatments. The experts on psychiatry. They have all kinds of drugs and medicines, crimes and organized crimes, acts and methods. Harvard Hospital has a bunch of people tied to a Colal house near me and to a Smith house near me. With a Leahy family, for example, that faked conversations with me. They personally and professionally have a bunch of judges and prosecutors and their family members and their kids. Also with the news, planting evidences at corners of streets with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, a whole bunch of countries at the same time. That's the substance of their syntax, of their sequence shifts, of their switching names and forging names roles, preventing police reports on a mass scale demonstrably, and putting fake things, making confessions tied to that too, because they already made confessions to the breaching method. Confessions were used by the breaching method before modern religions, religious messengers were born. I believe that Muhammad was the last religious messenger. But people won't allow free speech as the people who preserve the religions and as the people who counter them as collusions too with their differences it needs to hide with the beginning of the Old Testament and with the beginning of the Quran. Really, it's said and how it's supposed to be. It tells us how to evaluate the book, but no one allows that part even know because they can't defend their readings of it out of sequence. Self-value not being haven't been used as styles of logic, natures of logic, just like with the other sciences. In other words, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions are out. The reason people don't know math is because they're organized crimes with the campuses. That one of the reasons why, and that's more interesting to people to understand about that. In other words, that's what this is about. Black people's right to survive. It's about how they got other things, others themselves, with everyone still fighting and blaming that on them. In other words, and why and how they're fighting too simultaneously to let us from anybody from using how we have black people's right to eyes as evidence. Comes with revelations. Comes with simultaneously we are demonstrated to how the other species bodies have two eyes. All exceptions, exception nature, come with demonstrations of the same thing /S that is generating all other things. We are an individual species body of individual bodies with all group differences generated by that which is generating totally different species, individual species bodies of individual bodies too. Same thing generating it. That's what we see. That's what we are shown. We're also shown how it is functional, being hyper invisible but still discernible. It's system that we know. Second, we have black people's rights of eyes, and we have heard all that we have been allowed to formally hear, to speak for what caused slavery. other has been communicated about that for our founders, then they declassify for the answer for that. Our founders did not have free speech. They were actively being tortured, extorted, in fact, human nature enslaved, while forced to pretend other to an extent. Otherwise, to hell hurt them, they'd have themselves and everyone around themselves hurt and tortured even worse. This is a method that is still standing. I barely had conversations with my own family members, specifically because of this. Increasingly, there's a Leahy family that pretended they had conversations with me as a kid, now as an adult. They're increasingly tied to people I don't know who have been planting evidence on my street. I did not respond either time because I knew he was involved with that, putting fake ties, fake natures of ties to me too, of Robert Rodriguez. And then he confirmed on Facebook his confessions about roles with an untimely death. These are also people roles with an untimely death at Trinity College, and with people who lived in my area at the time, who were also forced, checked, and persuaded to collusions with multiple police departments involved with the same house/S near me, tied to a Phil Colo, the extended family members of one of them, and a whole bunch of other people at Hartford Hospital. In other words, Phil Colo has roles with foreign and domestic and his educators. I only saw him one time on the outside of the campus from a distance, and there are proofs that they took a picture of me to make it look fake ties, fake natures, ties to people next to me. They've been doing that on the sides of the campuses. A Subby Bajera was further involved with the sexual and medical offenders of kids years apart, with judges and prosecutors and their family members, with the same house named Colo, involved with foreign and domestic doctors, and people through locations uses too that they don't even know about. Him and his father with the name Ray Colo. Even if that wasn't them, with the typed comments by Ray Colo with the word immature and psychedelics. They have roles with people on off the corrections offices and off the judicial branch offices with all natures of identity theft, fraud, slanders, which note this, even some black KKK Confederate flag time collusions with digital crimes and whiting forensics in the Britain Superior Court, with the Facebook page of the principal upskirt nature. They forced that with other natures of organized crimes at the same time. I never had a class in grammar school with a Ray Colo. He came out to my street when I was in fourth grade. And where he came from, reportedly next to the state corrections offices. It's also with a whole bunch of people next to the state corrections offices and with the name Lance Cuddy. I never had a word of conversation with Lance Cuddy. He's also increasingly involved with people that confessed and recorded him involved with the child abuses of kids on the corrections offices, and with Michelle Sandquist, further involved with WTNH, and with Fox Connecticut News and WFSB with predicate acts with kids, various natures of organized crimes at the same time. That's why women roles with sexual and medical offenders of kids, and to keep syntax little tricks, where then they pretend, oh, this is what was said, or something like that. And they're also just faking evidences. They just, WFSB faked conversations with me. Now they're pretending it's their roles with nuclear or whatever. Because there are overt uses of the right to lie where they don't have the right to lie. And this is through time. And these are people that weren't even in classes with me, who have roles doing and saying things to make it look like other. Increasingly, I don't know her name. People tied to a Joshua Stryker. He's been planting evidences with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and people next to body dumping spots and journalists and news locations at the same time. These are not legitimate roles with the military, with overt criminal enterprises and private ones either, with differences, racketeering worse than war crimes. Roles, you guys don't have identities of law capable of speaking for the law. So everyone forces everyone to pretend, oh, it's either good or bad, you speak for police. Good or bad, you speak for the court. Good or bad. The difference of that, what is witch trials about? What are witch trials about? Why is there a witch trials place next to Webb House? Why is it Webb House now renamed the Webb Stevens Museum? Why is it, since it was Webb House and now as a Webb Stevens Museum, even more narratives by why and how that's justified when it's others communicated for James Madison and for our founders behind him and his plan. And then George Washington, who agreed to be the first president to help them and to use that plan, which was to force the other founders, both Native American and colonists. There are proofs that Native Americans were a part of that, though, as the plural part that we were supposed to refer to as James Madison singular, because it was his plan they brought to George Washington. And to have him agree to use that plan. And that means to counter extort them, other people, to force them to break those crazy, crazy laws, syntactically, those laws against everyone. But everyone self-valued rules to an extent. Everyone had to pretend free speech to an extent, even though it wasn't real. Exactly with the breaching method wanted to need, otherwise that body would be sentenced, including if that body was a majority of people, including if it was everyone. That's what slavery is about. That's what changing what black pupils, whites of eyes communicates is about. Comes with the revolution, revelations. But right where and how there are people pretending theory with passions and emotions. There's time racketeering worse than war crimes. You guys aren't paying attention to what's actually unfolding. Then this breaching method shows them need a whole bunch of people with the Institute living on the campus of Harvard Hospital. They have rules through the country like in 1822. They were founded on the campus of Harvard Hospital. They're still there. Criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, wrought takes on American history. There's a Christina Sioka involved with a Dr. Gilmore who attached me to fake conversations with himself. And they have rules with some Mendez police families intercities of Connecticut and next to a Montessori school in West Hartford that is also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with the FBI and former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and a James Comey with the Britain Superior Court with some black KKK Confederate flag theme involved with some black and white female judges and male ones. Increasingly that court, and they have a victim's advocate. Increasingly collusion / with overt criminal enterprises and private ones. Now they're trying to pretend it's because they're military or whatever. They have time collusions with people from forced. They torture, forced, and they're fighting with each other. People from Russia and Ukraine at Hartford Hospital with their doctors, as the ones involved in increasingly people with the Wethersfield police that fake conversations and being there as a kid and as an adult. And when I did get arrested there one time as an adult, I consciously, they didn't even ask me any questions. They took my thing and that was it. And I didn't have to speak with them about anything. In other words, even though I didn't know what they were arresting me for, they're putting fake cover-ups, people all along Route 175. And there was a Miss Riley involved with people with Jewish syntax. And as rules with people that were in the class they arrested me from, who have been planting evidence on all sides of my house for people from other areas. They also have rules with home break-ins. These are increasingly people with the judicial branch offices and names next to it in Connecticut and the judicial branch offices. Also involved with World Trade Center predicate acts. At the same time, while they have roles with whiting forensics on Facebook people too, with the words like extremism, and they're pretending these are policies, initiatives. They have been putting fake transcripts right through administrations, refusing to get on paper. They're using wire and mail crime methods. They already stacked a fake letter they pretended. They have interstates. They have the Native American intelligence too. People tied to Joshua Stryker, and a whole bunch of people tied to him. I wasn't even in my grade. He's been stacking fake things in databases and sequence shifts, trying to make it look like, and then sequence shifts, like people will make confessions for him the next day. Years later, it only happened 3 times. 2 times. But the next day he's standing there to make it look like we're in a communications with each other. Or had verbal word, but I never had a word of conversation with a Joshua Stryker. He's involved with lying about himself and about me, with people on off the state judicial branch offices, also with their family members and their difference as adults or kids, relative where they are used remotely, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions. We have and have had answers They have more scams at Hartford Hospital than there are streets in Hartford and Wethersfield, Hartford and the neighboring suburbs. No. The phenomenon of Hartford, self-described as a suburban / urban city, but that being and having been influenced by the breaching method that had designed homes since before America's founders were born, for the torture method, the extortion and factory nature slavery method that had slavery entrenched northern colonies and southern colonies, more than 13. James Madison and the founders behind him, the plan they used and gave the leverage for means for George Washington to be able to use it, to pull it off, was to counter a counter extortion method, because those crazy laws were against everyone. So the same, to an extent, that no one wanted it. Non-distinctly, the North and the South didn't want rolls with slavery. They didn't want rolls with all the truths. Like you don't want rolls with it, but then they're paying you money. You still don't want rolls with it. But there's an exception there. See, we use that to make people say, well, and then leave it to the other expert. No one spoke for law. They rely on the expert. Well, we rely on the history experts. History experts are using knowledge of good and evil to get over on that principle. James Madison and the founders behind him see president / chief. Nature itself shows us those founders, plural, also Native American. But Native Americans and colonists together trying to get, as we know, the human species body longs to have the Constitution unabridged. And just like the other countries do. But everyone speaks and is forcing to be entertained their speech for economies and value treatments as systems and through systems tactical ulterior from the one that is human species body of individual bodies. And all group differences shown too simultaneously. That identity of value progression has relativity to positive and negative simultaneously. Distinctly from, but non-distinctly from how value has relativity to positive and negative simultaneously. Which comes apart with its how nature shows us it is functional, how it is hyper invisible but still discernible, distinctly from how it is invisible but still discernible, as the parts of speech of English grammar are. The subject, there is an identity of hyper invisible but still discernible. It has us only capable of appreciating subjects individually, grouped, and simultaneously, to an extent, while being demonstrated to. There is a further identity of hyper-simultaneous that is not anything else, but it is all thing at once. Anyway, because we are observing its complete identity from inside itself, just like a cell of your body as your complete identity would observe your complete identity. It is not your complete identity, but it is anyway. In other words, here many pray, but also because now, since semi-ancient times, campuses, regardless of whose fault or what, campuses with abridged sciences while pretending other roles, as collusion /s, with things at other locations there, the difference of that too. That can't afford to be, let alone to protract. In anybody, formal or non, short words proper with convictions, let alone convictions with guilt. Had convictions with guilt been right by anyone, it would have revealed how there was a hyper-foreign human factory nature breaching method as a scientific value, hyper-additional from names A through Z, that are recorded originally and still, being and having been kept, blaming other things, others, ourselves, for things that breaching method caused, to keep things that, in other words, rolls with use /s of that collusion, it kept and keeps too. And just right here where we could observe, I'm not even a lawyer. This is about a predicate acts with facts method, replacing how a breaching method replaced what nature communicates with black people's whites of eyes, a whole bunch of things about black and white, for example. And we have had this replaced. We have had its relativity. We have had the hyper relativity / the relativity, not just the relativity. Because then too, wherever we could discern, like its identity of value progression as an distinct nature shows us reasons, obligations to discern the scientific value, to discern and name the scientific value of the identity of all space / existence, but also to explain how and why its name is about the invisible but still discernible, which is distinct from the hyper invisible but still discernible. This is a system, like, for example, there's slavery. Okay, there's criminal foreign influences. There's / hyper criminal foreign influences when we look. Because northern colonies and southern colonies, they had sickly distinctly, but sickly non-distinctly too. Roles with even slavery against our own black people's whites of eyes, therefore, forbid communications, natural communications, forbid religion while pretending other. Well, we know that religion, in other words, they prevented me religious right. One woman asked me, I'm a pantheist. I believe that Muhammad was the last messenger, and that Allah is what we should name the scientific value of the hyper invisible but still discernible, because it also goes with the alphabet. Allah's name, each letter spells a word, and each word spells a sentence. Also, Allah's name spells alpha longs alpha high, long alpha's high. See the word alpha inside the word alphabet. I only read a little past where it says in the beginning of the Old Testament, it says only defend right here, where the names of the people, the sciences, will come together in the part that comes before it. And so, in other words, now I was like, where's the story of the famous story I heard about the two trees and Adam and Eve? So I went a little far, I looked through, and I found it. In other words, but this part comes before that. It says, only defend right here, where the names of the people, the sciences will come together in the part that comes before it. And the beginning of the beginning of the Quran too, it says all that matters. It doesn't say one thing that matters. It says all that matters. As if one's going to be honest about their use of the name Allah, for the name of for the scientific value of the name of all space / existence. That identity that is not the other species' bodies, it is not our species' bodies, but is all things anyway, and showing us it that way and other ways. To an extent, it's individual identity of value progression and the needs to discern that. But simultaneously, too, because wherever we can discern that one identity distinct of value / value progression, it comes also with the parts of itself, hyper invisible but still discernibly distinct. And this is, too, what we are discerning, where and how we discern the future. There are seasons that are not even here. Even if they don't get here, we can discern their value, their body. There's only increasing value, even if they never get here again. The past that is gone, we can discern it as only increasingly valuable here and now. To an extent, we can discern. Right? Active, we can discern things, group things. Now, those are distinct identities of hyper invisible but still discernible. So past is gone, is hyper invisible, but still discernible. In other words, and that's what, in other words, that's what progressive is about, what the seasons are about, and their shared identity it is. The science of sharing identity, boxing, martial arts, and wrestling about fighting, but by the rules. But the rules have been abridged since semi-ancient times, and we have been taken to systems tactical terror from the one that could appreciate what is communicated by differences as communicated by nature itself. That's why we haven't had this breaching method employed things to be pretended debatable that are not, and things that are not debatable forced to be entertained, pretended debatable. This breaching method assigned people what it costs, forced the roles with, to be blamed on things like racism, and people forcing that, and forced, checked, hurt, and persuaded to, relative to where and to how. They keep insulated the organized crime acts and methods against little kids, fake motivations for it, with the differences of the guilt of other little kids, even if they don't even know, because they're just faking and changing what actually happens against everyone, so no one could go back and afford it, because they're playing games with that. Increasingly, people with Harvard Hospital's Institute of Living recorded themselves with the FBI and with state police families interstates, involved with white and forensic sources, and this Phil Cololo, a whole bunch of people tied to a Phil Cololo, and there's only two of the names of the sons of a Delaferra. I don't know his name and his mother. There's a Mike Delaferra and a Chris Delaferra. They have roles with some probate court judges, with all kinds of crimes, with databases, and fire and medical campuses where they have roles with Russians and Ukraine, and fire departments in ways that might be nuclear because of how they have roles with overt identity theft, fraud, slanders, and pretending to my family members that I know them. And they try to make a fake exception with a Ray Claw. I should not have gone to, I don't know why I brought a Ray Claw. He walked in because he walked in. They were like timing the perspective of, like if someone's like walking back in the store and then someone's trying to do a scam and they're trying to lie to the person, and when the person's there, they're doing that. In other words, something like that with our family members, where how this breaching method has roles with those predicate acts with facts, needs, natures, and styles, pretending not to realize that are part of the answer /S, where and how people originally and still have motivations for that. Everyone has forces roles against any voice of any individual who tries to defend the order of how the order of the finite, the grouped and simultaneous. There are lies that are multi-front, fake motivations, like people with their, oh, that's my job, that's the only reason why. Then shut your mouth. So then everyone just goes away, because a whole bunch of people need to shut their mouth, but they need to pretend others simultaneously. That's why they can't follow mandated law when people note like predicate acts. The British Superior Court has predicate acts with Facebook personally and professionally. A whole bunch of people tied to the name Kerr. There's an officer, Jerry Miller, who has been planting evidences on Facebook with Facebook and people named Kerr, with former director of the FBI, and with Wethersfield Police, and the Britain Superior Court, and a whole bunch of courts, judges, and prosecutors involved with conversations with houses near me named Cololo and Smith, where they've been collusions with the courts and all sides of criminal and civil cases at the same time, and with people further with the principal upskirt nature and some other principal child abusers. And they have roles with overt criminal enterprises, private ones. They're implying it's their roles with Afghan leaders and kids since I was a kid. These are people incompetent. No, they're blaming each other. They're being used to blame other things, others, or selves for things the breaching method caused. And I'm trying to show you guys this. This is how I can defend you guys. This is relative to how and to why they won't let the president be honest, like about the fake news. These are people WFSB has roles planting evidences next to the campuses I went since I was a kid with people involved. Also with abuses of the leaders of the kid and the difference of the abuse. There's a Kevin Harris who non-verbally sought me out to record, confess, demonstrate, confirm. He has roles with his family. I never had a word of conversation with him. Kevin Harris has rules with a Brian Silver, with the Connecticut courts, and with Soulsby and other prosecutors, and their rules with people on Covington Street and the sides around Central Connecticut State University through time with FBI Director Robert Luskin, and now James Comey too. There are proofs. There's a guy. It might have been James Comey at one of the times they brought me to New Britain Superior Court so they could stack more cover-ups of what they've been doing each year since before everyone was born. They've been collusions with it. It's relative to where and to how they leave out what witch trials is about. Either they're made up. There were slavery laws entrenched. There was crazy breaching method against Native Americans against themselves. Otherwise, they were hurt by the breaching method. They were sentenced by the breaching method. This is the same. What motivated roles with that? It had already been against their own countries too. A through Z have blamed other things, others ourselves, for what caused religious messengers have to come about too. In other words, we have been individuals, groups, names like UN. The UN has roles with a Bob Chase at Whiting Forensics, who's increasingly involved with organized crimes with people from other areas that have been planting evidence on my street since I was a kid with Whiting Forensics, since before he was with them demonstrably. In other words, and these are also people with Sandy Hook campuses and intelligence, and with people with the prison there and their prisoners, even if that was intelligence people, like people with the name Cintron. Increasingly collusions with names all along Route 3. A Joe DeMauro and a Heather Hansen recorded confessed by a Joe DeMauro and a John DeMauro. They have roles of people with the judicial branch offices, with the work criminal enterprises and private ones, and proven and further recorded confessed, demonstrate, confirm sexual and medical offenders of kids roles, also with the names next to Hartford Hospital, as the ones at Hartford Hospital, involved with people on Valley Crest Street with the name DeMauro and tied to them. I believe one of them's names is Spinelli, and there are people with the name Schedule. That might be a different street, but it's tied. The side of their house is on it. They also have the probate court judges involved with this, and crime acts and methods at prisons that are all torture methods where it's you can't be telling that, or it'll be where, in other words, and then you're gonna have to write that, and someone's gonna read it first, so there's no way to speak about it at the elderly homes too. And you guys speak for value and money as fakes. You were child abused at campuses A through Z. Here, Anthony, forgiveness is so no one leaves out the breaching method, otherwise to get it wrong, and so no one will stop. Will say, "Oh, that's crazy! You're making an allegation." In other words, I'm not telling you if you want to debate it. Anyone who disbelieves the interbranch refusing to identify themselves. Since I was a kid, these are also Hartford courts and the Britain Superior Court that have been planting evidences intercities with the names at the corrections offices and judicial branch offices. These are also people that have been controlling the syntax at Fox News in Hartford, Fox Connecticut News. Their roles with people tied to that Sullivan woman, and people are involved with a Daryl Sullivan with Park Street, Lena's Pizza, involved also with the FBI in foreign countries, people with the Saudi Arabia attackers, and that use both of our countries remotely, where they have fake punks too, who are also atheist themed, like a Wayne, I don't know his name. He's involved with the intelligence community too, intercities, involved with identity theft fraud slanders, and with a former Dean Judd, a former Dean Judd and his family. In other words, were planting evidences with foreign and domestic military. Fake motivations they were planting too, no, because the breaching method has that. These are also people recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. Increasingly, people from my grammar school in Wethersfield will tell you, as it was actually recorded too, they're putting fake ties, fake dangers of ties between people in classes that don't even know each other. They're not even in the same class. They're just in the same grade. And this breaching method does this on a mass scale. It has that relative to the class of such and such, just the class of that. In other words, differences. This is where they go back and forth with subject treatments. These are courts that have been used originally still for what can't afford to have discerned what witch trials are about. You don't leave out how slavery laws were entrenched simultaneously with the witch trials place, what it's about, next to the Webb House, now renamed the Webb Stevens Museum. Further communicated tactical ulterior than our founders communicated for that place and for themselves. And about for black people's whites of eyes. I'll see the whites of eyes as cipher too, because no one had free speech. We had to declassify. You guys can't even have a legitimate nature of debate regarding black people's whites of eyes. Right through, in other words, the World Trade Center attack was effectively pulled off to keep everyone using words, fighting to defend uses of words as collusions, like extremism. You see, but in other words, our leaders too, they came through criminally foreign influence campuses and tactically delusions raw. Forgiveness is to fight about the principles themselves. And you allow people free speech. When the president tries to be free speech, everyone punishes and tortures him. In other words, even Barack Obama, they wouldn't have the quality of fact-sheeping nature. They forced integrity of law to be pretended in ways that wouldn't allow him to demonstrate what can be discerned while we're just with having black people's whites of eyes. So instead, everyone stays roles, blaming other things, others, or selves for fact-sheeping nature, torture, and extortion, and slavery. Standing. The suburbs were designed for torture, extortion, fact-sheeping nature, slavery. Thank God I could make positives out of criminal insidious ones. Criminal insidious, criminally foreign influence natures of means to cause positive. The only ones there. Styles, needs, natures more. In other words. And the theater behind it as criminal insidious natures, we must discern. Not even a lawyer. Thank God. Lawyers on both sides of cases. In the courts themselves, and the police forms, and the whole process is where our collusion /S with the breaching method to screen itself that way. That's what witch trials are about, even if they're made up. You don't leave out how the slavery was there. You don't leave out how there's witch trials apart with their slavery in northern colonies, southern colonies, not just left out. They're blaming it on the kids. In other words. So the second you read the opening lines of history, they're going to shut up the kids' minds. Not going to take that serious. While they have others that can observe right in their mind relative to confessions and demonstrations that keep people going, and realizing that and how. Because they confess to the kids who are not of interbranch and who are not of criminal enterprises at the same time, the terrorists. Have time collusions. They have self-body rules with words like extremism. They're out of their minds. American history begins with the principle about James Madison's plan. You can't understand James Madison's plan. You can't understand the rest. You can't understand the Monroe Doctrine. How the rest of the colonists and the rest of the Native Americans grouped together with James Madison's plan. And George Washington's role. No one had free speech about the real motivations. That's why everyone had to pretend about a tea tax, even though slavery is entrenched. Get out. In other words, things are not debatable that are pretended debatable and simultaneously. Things that are debatable are pretended not debatable. because simultaneous nature is gotten over on, because the hyper simultaneous nature has gotten over on. The hyper native here. Nature itself shows us there were three natures of Native Americans that didn't know what to do. Just like the people of Africa and of Europe didn't know what to do. People of Asia didn't know what to do. A breaching method broke the function of how locations, areas, and states were operating the phenomenon of the names of countries before the sciences became forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded. Collusion/S. In defenses of themselves, there are proofs, because no one would want that otherwise, but against nature itself. In other words, they forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded the people operating names A through Z to counter itself, a breaching method, a hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise that got them to counter themselves wrong and to defend that. And then people to counter that, rightly, but wrongly, exactly the way the breaching method wanted to need each other, blaming each other, other things, others themselves for things that the breaching method was causing. And now maintaining, but through how everything it does is through ourselves, A through Z, including countries. Still, that could only be operated by locations, areas, and states. Any grouping of countries, speaking about power and might, still, while systems through tactical terror from its own, can't afford to, we're still entertaining locations, areas, and states, syntax, and roles with sciences. Not one voice spoke honest about as a science voice for New York City, for the problems. No one spoke honestly for their science, for English, why there's the problem of English in New York City. They wouldn't let a voice speak properly for it. Any of the good math teachers, they wouldn't let them speak properly for it. Scientists share an identity. See, they're putting organized crimes roles that where and how they have organized crimes grouped wrong as collusion/S. They have collusions with criminal enterprises at and next to, including private ones, and the differences of the guilt of the private ones or the overt criminal ones or A through Z with the insidiousness nature itself is used remotely, right where it's being pretended not. A whole bunch of people pretended honesty spoke for any location, let alone New York City. Honestly, like one science voice must be somewhere honest. No. And or relative to where and how anyone tries to be honest, that body becomes sensed. Even if that body is a majority of people, even if it's everyone. And that is adapted to. That's why and how we have black people's rights of eyes, and no one, even together, we're not allowed to use that as hyper-evidential. There are all kinds of readings of statutes and precedents. They left out exceptions. They left out not just the plausibility of the recorded collusion/S that courts and that police forms had originally, and still that's what witch trials about. That's what slavery is about at all locations/S. Not now online too. It's even recorded, but they're replacing what's recorded, like with whiting forensics with the FBI and state police families interstate and their sources, recorded increasingly planting evidences at and between campuses, and then all sides of the kids' houses in manifest ways where people make subject treatments as styles, needs, they pretend, would they think about things where they can't defend that without giving up secrets. So they'll do that just to pretend that, and then they pretend that's their motivation. See, but courts have collusions like that. Investigators of all natures have collusions like that. The breaching method knew they would. These are people in other words, this is a use of location/S as the pilots involved. I mentioned the pilots here. Increasingly, the Weathersfield police have roles of pilots on off the campuses I went. And when I was living next to one campus and going to the other one, and with people that have been planting evidence on my street, with Wethersfield police. And in other words, I caught them clearer than day, before and after the World Trade Center attack. Recorded intercities doing this. Collusions, too, with the names involved with the child abusers with them and the retired police chiefs and their intimate ties with it. And medical families, foreign and domestic at the same time. These are not legitimate roles with psychiatry. They're criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions wrong. They're putting fake transcripts at Harvard Hospital. They're forging names of doctors. Also in a way to make it like where the people go back and look at stuff, they're going to try to hide our side's guilt and make the wrong outcome. In other words, where they have a Dr. Shamsi Ali guilty with judges and people and prosecutors involved with a Leahy family, and one's named Lombardo too, with the Department of Corrections, and with the Department of Transportation, Department of Motor Vehicles too, with people with the name Perone. And that's also people next to Fox Connecticut News. In other words, in the corner of street of Southstein Highway and Town Line Drive, a Perone family has roles confessed, recorded, demonstrate, confirm involved with child offenders, leaders of kids, people involved with identity theft, fraud, slander, sequence shifts, federal evidences rackets, criminally foreign influence uses of investigators, remotely criminally foreign influence to cover up about how they've been all sides of criminal and civil cases, interstates and internationally. At the same time, the court's names, the names of their positions having been used as weapons. And then specifically it have to be screened the breaching method that is replaced right from the communications of James Madison or found behind him in his plan. No one will even allow honesty about the extortion of George Washington. That's all that we need. You know, any little kid with black people's whites of eyes could explain the rest from there. All exception nature will show us that it is functional, how there is a distinct identity, a volume that is no other one, but is all one. Anything, even if anything is made up, has its particular volume science / hypervolume science, inseparable from and as the value of it, the finite, the smallest finite detail, the order of the finite, distinctly from how it is grouped, the order of what is grouped active, distinctly from how it is progressive and or simultaneous values, and everything simultaneous has a semi-nature relationship to that was greater than and simultaneously more finite than all things. Vaccines. That's why Allah Akbar is said, and simultaneously the Trinity and Jesus about a juxtaposition, because this is about hyper-additional nature and how it's made, how it is functional, where there is one distinct, hyper-invisible, but still discernible identity of value / value progression. Not just showing us the identity of the sciences share by boxing, martial arts, and wrestling, where, how, why. There is one way to fight that all win. In other words, I'm not just saying shadow box, and I do it. No, but I'm saying there's a way to make evolution's fruits gifts, means out of nowhere, otherwise we sense. In other words, we sense right here with black people's ways of life. Where is it when all formal voices have been speaking about history? Don't pretend black is a side or not. That's exactly what the breaching method employ. You don't leave out the breaching method's reemployment of nature's communications with black and white. In other words, we have some black and white collusion recorded. There's some black, white, KKK, Confederate flag theme, Latino themed in their educators as adults on off the state of Connecticut judicial branch offices, increasingly since they were kids and now with their own kids, involved with federal evidences crimes, confessions, wire crimes, and people, medicines crimes too, or other natures of organized crimes, roles with body-only spots and murder spots, including one reported conjunctive to Two-Route Highway and Hangdog Lane, where they run into each other, and their conjunctions, like the Berlin Turnpike before the heart of Hartford. Increasingly, too, people recording, confessing, demonstrating, confirmed non-verbally a Casper family involved with a whole bunch of people with identity theft, fraud, slanders with that, and with their educators putting fake things in databases. I never had a class with Jack Casper. Never saw him around campuses. There was one fake exception. They made me make. Usually they make the fake exception. There are a whole bunch of ties between people where they made it look like they know me. Where they're putting fake ties, fake natures of ties to me, like with the Robert Rodriguez involved with the World Trade Center attack names on our side in the foreign countries. These are also people a number of ways involved with the border and with the bordering states and the differences of guilt with the roles. And because of their roles with rackets, also with differences of the guilt at Hartford Hospital or the businesses or houses next to them, like an Iola's Kitchen and a Tomorrow's Market, involved planting evidences next to Wethersfield Parks and with people with the Parks and Rec through time involved with the community center of Wethersfield and the town offices, including with probation officers, increasingly collusion with body-dumping spots and murders and other natures of organized crimes, with judges and interbranch pretending passions and emotions, involved with predicate acts with facts, as ones on off the state judicial branch officers, conjunctions to it and conjunctions to that, and exceptions. It's manifest that way because of the breaching methods uses of everyone. And the uses of recorded these names involved also with all sides of criminal and civil cases, and the interbranch and the names of their positions used collusions with overt criminal enterprises, private ones who have time collusions with proven child abusers, leaders of kids first forced, and even digitally, the like a whole bunch of people tied to a Detective Samuda and Officer Hunter, involved with Central Connecticut State University, also with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, who has roles with courts, family members, planting evidences, and affecting the outcomes of cases, and roles with news names, changing the outcomes of cases, planting fake evidences through the news to cover up how they've been using all natures of investigations, investigators, remotely, criminally, foreign influence, tactical illusions, or many tied to Joseph Dennis and his educators. Also have been putting fake things in databases involved with medical corruption with mayors and ties to mayors, involved with criminal enterprises, private ones, identity theft, fraud, slanders on a mass scale, because that's one of the things it is, replacing what nature communicates to each actually, and for each, and what our founders communicated about Black people's rights and lives, what they declassified about how they didn't and why they didn't have free speech. So they have roles for uses of it. We're not supposed to hold back, go it's a policy, and they let the delusions of both, any of the presidents get in our way. Miss Gabbard. But I understand what's going on. And I'll defend the president. You guys have to please defend me. Get me off the fake conversations with WFSB, Connecticut's Channel 3 News, and about the World Trade Center attack. And as their role, and with fake conversations with other people too, they pretended. And they pretended me to fake and change communications with my family members. And they changed what my family members communicated as collusions with people next to the World Trade Center attack in Manhattan, New York, that Connecticut's Channel 3 News had and has. And their sources are also collusions with other journalists and like a public television place. And people involved, Russian and American, with that. And with the police chief, with a former police chief, Cintron, and lawyers tied to him, with the name Bayard, involved with criminally foreign influence readings of statutes consciously to an extent, and or where they have relative delusions too, and with differences racketeering worse than war crimes. There were also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed involved with WTNH sources at corners of streets and with intelligence families that lived near me through time. They have been planting evidences with names at corners of streets and corners of buildings putting fake ties, fake natures of ties to kids, and then making fake exceptions, having people repeat things with the courts that are putting fake things in their databases. Increasingly, since I was a kid, a bunch of people tied to the British Superior Court have roles with planting evidences. That's recorded. Forced, check, term, persuaded roles, interstates and international, but also hyper international. We're going to observe how slavery was sickly non-distinctly northern colonies and southern colonies, but also sickly non-distinctly. See, we would observe these things and we would appreciate them. Things wouldn't appear debatable that are not, while simultaneously things that are not debatable would be gotten away with pretending to be debatable, like extremism. And increasingly, Connecticut corrections offices and judicial branch offices had roles of the World Trade Center attack. And, there are delusions wrought, too, and with American history. So get me off the fake conversations with the people. One woman walked by and she said, what religion are you? I said, Muslim. I didn't explain how I'm a pantheist. But I believe that Muhammad is the last messenger and that we should call the name of all spaceless existence Allah. And that there's the Trinity is about, for example, how there are three distinct, hyper invisible, but still discernible also bound parts of the forever nature that is showing us it is the identity, the seasons shared. It is them as the future that is shown to us here now, before it is here, as a distinct part of it's hyper invisible but still discernible body, just as is the past. And what is active now here, these three parts. Prepare your hearts, but hold your minds. Free your hearts, but hold your minds. So please follow mandate law. It's not hard to believe that a court would switch names or forge names and keep stacking fake things and forget about their motives. Get them on paper. If they want to put their motive, put it on paper, because they're refusing to identify themselves legitimately since I was a kid. And there's an officer, Jerry Miller, who's still involved, one of the ones involved also with the executive branch and the judicial branch and the corrections offices, in prisons, with people from other areas have been planting fake ties, fake natures of ties to me through the syntax of people on all sides of my house. Now, Hartford Hospital also has people involved with this. And these are also people involved with the police phones, families, involved with the ones involved with them, with the extended family members too, involved with the World Trade Center attack. And their roles with the names like these Mendez police have Saudi involved with them. With Hartford Hospital, where Wethersfield police have some Mendez police, and one's named Tomorrow, who faked conversations with me at the Wethersfield Police Department with other police. I had no police conversations with any of them there. And the kids who did go down there and have conversations with the police, they increasingly have roles planting evidences with people from other countries, and a whole bunch of people next to Hartford Hospital who recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed they have predicate acts there with intelligence next to the sides of New Britain Central Connecticut State University through time. Chris Walters, one of the strangers from other areas, who also repeated he has roles with the drugs and medicines and types of things like that with the investigators involved with this. They are not legitimately pretending to be defending unmarked police forms and positions. They're confessing and demonstrating this. These are increasingly people with an Anthony Agman recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with all kinds of social security scams and medical scams with doctors, putting fake transcripts and collusions with people in my area, involved with a Joshua Julian and an Anthony Agman, also with digital and sexual and medical offenders of kids, with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and some Latino themed and some KKK themes from other areas, involved with a Phil Collo and more people with whiting forensics, pretended passions and emotions on my street. They're going to have problems. You guys we have violence, incredible threats against me. And you got the interbranch refusing to identify themselves Well, as punks bringing their kids into their motivations, planting fake motive evidences with that too, by pulling them into the conversations on the Facebook and on the television with the fake news that put me in fake conversations with them. The other news location with their sources planting through time. A whole bunch of people, corners of streets all along Route 175 and conjunctions to it, all conjunctions to that, like Ridge Road. A whole bunch of people along Ridge Road and conjunctions to it have roles with identity theft, fraud, slanders against me, putting fake things in databases, fake ties, fake natures of ties to me, and in other words, all truths with that they use as lies too. That's also recorded, as the ones with all sides of criminal and civil cases, increasingly the roles with the corners of streets too. So there's an officer, Jerry Miller, who's one of the officers. Also, there's a whole bunch of people with the Facebook pages of New Britain Superior Court. And first it was just one page, then they had a whole bunch of Facebook pages because they're trying to cover up, they make it look like they're not being directed to act like that from the background, because there will be a former director of the FBI is involved with that. Because I caught in the Britain Superior Court before the World Trade Center, they're involved interstates with people internationally involved with the World Trade Center attack, predicate acts also after it to hide that. Increasingly, it's people were recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, tied to a Gail King. And two, involved with some black KKK, Confederate black theme collusions on off the campuses with the military, intermilitary too, and involved with people interstate, intercities, interstates. A bunch of them, I don't even know their names on Facebook. I don't even know their names. And people with the name Kerr, I reportedly dishonorably discharged from the Marines. Even if that wasn't real, they're involved with all kinds of, identity theft, fraud, slanders, and planting evidences roles with other countries and their educators behind people's backs in databases, putting fake and change things as collusion/S with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, proven child abusers, leaders of kids' first force roles. Officer Jerry Miller made confessions about his roles planting on evidences on the side of my house with people that also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. There are fire departments and police departments have been doing that too, lying about what happens every time they come here and on all sides of my house. They also have roles through time with that. We need to get them on paper, one name and sequence. Stop pretending it's personal. Let's get them on paper, please.